So it's fun to be here, to be thinking about this book that is coming out, and to think about where we came from, right? The first time we sat down and talked, and thought about doing this project. Do you remember some of the conversation we had? Kind of what initiated that whole conversation at the or Jimmy Madison's, I think.
Right. Yeah. Well, the book had come out in the spring, late spring, early summer. Mm-hmm. We got together for lunch and a drink somewhere in the middle of the summer because we hadn't seen each other since school had out, and started talking about Coates and the book and what it would be like to have some responses to it from
I remember it being really interesting because I remember being interested in reading the book, and I think maybe I had bought it at that point, but I hadn't gotten through it, and I think you had read it already. And so you were asking me what I thought about it, and I didn't have enough to go with yet. I had just heard what everybody else had to say about it, so I was really excited. And then you asked me, what would you think about getting some other people in on this and putting something together, like actually having a volume where we respond to this thing. And I said, I'm totally open to that, and then here we are.
2.5 years later.
2.5 years later. Yeah.
So do you want to say a little bit about just who Ta-Nehisi Coates is and some of the work he's done?
Yeah, I think for me, I can talk about it I can talk about Ta-Nehisi Coates from my perspective, right? I think it's really interesting to me because I feel like I came to Coates late. It was like, 2014, 2015. I'm picking up Coates and reading Between the World and Me, and everybody else has been reading blogs and essays from the Atlantic, since the Case for Reparations.
Right.
And so I'm coming back reading those things later. Yeah. And so I really know him from Between the World and Me. And the first time I heard him, I think it was actually the first time I read Coates. It was a small excerpt from the Atlantic Online.
Right.
And I remember thinking as I read through, I really need to read this. Like there was something emotional that gripped me about the way that he was writing. And then I heard on public radio an interview, and I thought, everybody's reading this guy, and he is saying some things that it seems to me are very difficult to say in kind of popular audiences where there are a lot of white people around. Right. And they're eating this stuff up. Like they love listening to him tell them how horrible America is in terms of racial justice. And he hasn't even really used that language, but the exploitation of black bodies and the destruction of black bodies is like an American pastime. And everybody wants to talk to him. Everybody wants to hear what he has to say. And as someone who's teaching courses on race on a regular basis, I felt like I had to read him. Yeah. What about you? Like, what provoked you to read him in the first place?
I read The Case for Reparations when it was the Atlantic cover story back in like 2014, and was blown away. I think a lot of people, that was the article that kind of put Coates on the map, because lots of us who think reparations are a good but totally unrealistic idea, that article just sort of made the argument so well. And so when Between the World and Me came out, I was sort of ready for it. I knew it was on its way, and I knew just from Case for Reparations that he needed to be read.
I feel like, and I don't know if this is what you mean by Case for Reparations, but I feel like part of the power behind Between the World and Me and Case for Reparations is his critique is not solely located in enslavement. Right. And actually, he really doesn't talk about that at all. He wants to talk about, housing and police brutality. And so you have to, this is part of the critique of folks who talk about race a lot. Stop thinking about what happened 150 years ago, and if you get past that, then you recognize the world is different. And his point is, no, actually, we don't have to talk about that.
Talk about housing in Chicago in the 1960s, right?
No, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and he put faces and names to it, right? He was interviewing people who where had been lived in districts that were redlined.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think one of the things that was that's been striking for me about Coates is that he does this historical thing, right? So you hear him engaging, scholars. He doesn't necessarily name them, right?
Yeah.
Explicitly. This is not academic work. It's
Right.
popular, but you can tell he's very well read.
Right.
He's a journalist, so he's doing his
Right.
homework. But then he has this ability to write in this really poetic style. And sometimes, interestingly enough, as an atheist, it feels spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a way. So it's interesting, you got two scholars here who work at a Christian university, and here's this guy, Coates. Of course, I mean he's popular enough that everybody's engaging him.
Yeah.
But he's explicitly not a Christian.
Right.
He's an atheist. I mean, he's kind of this. He represents what seems to be a kind of black realist perspective. And we put together this project where we're inviting Christians to engage him.
Yeah.
So, why Christianity? Why engage him this way?
I guess when I read it, I thought, so the criticisms of Christianity are direct. There's no beating around the bush, but they're also really interesting. And I thought it's not something that theologians like myself can ignore. And I thought that it could be a potentially really productive conversations to have theologians react with this in ways that weren't defensive, but were generally trying to learn from Coates. And as a Mennonite theologian, he also has some pretty direct criticisms to make of nonviolence. And so I thought this is also something that we need to kind of think about. And you and I were both teaching the book or parts of the book in class or planning on doing so.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we were thinking about it, and we thought there's got to be other people who want to also think about it.
And it was interesting for me too, because I'm not a theologian, right? I'm a historian, and I think his historical analysis is right on. I mean, he's parroting everything that I've learned about American history, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's and what's difficult about teaching American history, I think, particularly in predominantly white Christian institutions, is people want to hear the beauty of it. And I'm reminded of the James Baldwin quote about American history. This is more beautiful and terrible than anything anyone's ever said about it. And I think Coates kind of captures that whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So for me, listening to my Christian students kind of struggling to hear him, because he doesn't offer, he doesn't offer hope, he doesn't offer comfort, right? This is the image in Between the World and Me of his son finding out that the people who killed Michael Brown are going to walk free. Yeah. And then that moment in Between the World and Me where he walks in behind his son, but he doesn't hug him, he offers no comfort, right? Because the world's, it's going to be a struggle. There isn't hope. And I think my students really struggled with reading Coates for that reason. I think they're used to hearing Martin Luther King Jr., or even James Baldwin, but Martin Luther King probably more so. At the end of whatever kind of critique of American society he might have, there's always this kind of soaring rhetoric at the end, right? That the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, or with Baldwin, who's more pessimistic, he's saying, well, but if we're willing to face these issues, it's possible. We might not be able to change it, but it's possible they can be changed. And Coates offers none of that. So my students are really struggling to figure out how do I engage this person who does not have this positive sense about the future and how this thing's going to go. And I wanted them to see, you can still engage this guy. You can still engage this the reality of the terribleness of American history, particularly when it comes to race, and you don't have to. You don't have to shy away just because he's an atheist.
And you don't have to think that in doing so you're betraying a particular account of Christian hope, or you may be betraying a particular account of Christian hope. That's not the only account of Christian hope. That maybe Coates can help Christians and theologians develop a different account of hope, or who recognize that that kind of pacifism is there all through the prophets too, instead of kind of feeling like because they're Christians they have to jump to this.
Right. I mean, I had Christians come to me and say, I had a really difficult time trusting Coates. Like there was kind of this lack of trust. So there may have been things to learn, right, about the limits of things like racial reconciliation or some kind of healing between black and white communities or people of color and white communities. And they could not hear Coates because he doesn't care. I mean, he doesn't care about that.
Yeah.
That's not his focus is on the destruction of black bodies, his son and Prince Jones and that kind of thing. And so they're saying, why you don't trust him? But I want to say, but he's telling the truth.
Yeah.
Right? So can we deal with the truth of what he's saying and maybe disagree with his conclusions if you want to? As a historian, I think the historical record is on his side.
Yeah.
Right.
So there was a lot of the conversation around the book when it came out was about this issue of hope.
Yes.
So Michelle Alexander reviewed it in, I think, The Nation, brought up this question of hope, and other reviewers did. But there was also some Christian writing on it that was pretty good. And so in September of 2015, I think, so after we had lunch, he tweeted out, what was the tweet? The best thing about Between the World and Me is seeing the engagement from Christians, serious learning experience for me. So that felt like this sort of confirmation of what we were trying to do, that this, if a bunch of, whether Christian historians or theologians took this thing seriously, if it's a serious learning experience for Coates, it can be a serious learning experience for theologians. And
absolutely. I mean, so that seems to be in some ways kind of, I mean, I think it's an invitation, right? I mean, I think when I remember when you saw that hashtag, that tweet, right? It was Twitter, right?
Yeah, Twitter.
I mean, I think you saw it as an invitation. I remember you kind of using that language with me as an invitation for Christians to engage this, because he wanted, it seems like he wanted conversation partners. It was really interesting for him to hear Christians saying something about this. So I think the encouragement with this volume is from us is to encourage other scholars, Christians of any variety, right, to really engage this text, to take seriously what he's saying, and we could learn, and we also have things to say, right, in response. Even with the, there's that spiritual kind of style that he writes in, but there's also this reticence to engage fully in this kind of metaphysical, in any kind of metaphysical reality, but it's kind of there and kind of wanting. And so we have something to say, perhaps, in the midst of that.
Yeah, and learning from him doesn't mean just sort of recapitulating it in our own language, but it also means critique and argument, but not in a defensive mode and not in a mode of sort of countering, but of critical conversation. So.
I think the work that's been done to put this volume together, I think kind of demonstrates, kind of offers to people, well, look, here are some ways that you can engage Coates. There's any number of themes that people pick up on.
There's at least 2 essays on the theme of hope that we've been talking about that are really thoughtful kind of engagements with Coates, and sometimes critical, but also pretty sympathetic.
Yeah, I mean, also the dream, right? This whole dream, is it a nightmare? Is it a dream? Like, what is this American thing, right? I mean, that's what Coates sets out in this book, to kind of really critique, or at least take seriously, this idea of American exceptionalism. And what does that actually mean, right?
Got a great essay on whiteness and how white people should respond to this or can learn from it.
Fathering as well, right? Fatherhood and kind of what the relationship between Coates and his son, but also like what is that? What
Coates and his son, and Coates and his father.
And Coates and his father, sure.
There's we have an essay on Howard University and Coates' experience at Howard in the book is like a central.
Right, and again, here's this spirituality thing, right? He's always talking about the Mecca.
Yeah, Howard.
Right. I mean, how much more religious can you get?
Yeah.
Right.
So that religious language pervades the book.
That's right.
And I think there's ways our authors kind of mine that language to show how even if Coates is an atheist, he's still sort of drinking from some of these spiritual wells.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm hoping that people will. I mean, with the variety of what we just named, I mean, there's lots of different ways to enter into this text, and I hope that with the authors that have done provided pieces and essays in this text, that other people can be inspired to kind of engage him in similar ways.
Right, and so professors who are teaching this text, these are models for ways their students can engage with it. For just lay people who are interested in Coates, they can
absolutely
pick this up. And
absolutely, yeah. Cool. It's been fun working with you on this. Yeah,
great time.
Yeah, awesome.